In today's lesson, we're going to look at a few different IELTS speaking cue cards about people who helped you. Essentially, they're all about the same thing, describing a helpful person. However, there are different ways that this could be expressed, and these may change your answer slightly. Remember to always pay close attention to the cue card so that you can fulfill the criteria for task response. Next, I'm going to show you how to analyze the question, make suitable notes, and then I will give my own sample answer to a cue card. I'll also make a few notes on appropriate language for this sort of task. In IELTS Speaking Part 2, you are often asked to describe a person. In this case, we're going to focus on a helpful person, or someone who has helped you. You will be given a cue card by the examiner. You should read it and spend 1 minute thinking about your answer. It is a good idea to make some notes to help you speak, because you will need to speak for between 1 and 2 minutes. Make sure that you pay attention to the exact wording of the question, as well as the points that the cue card states. Here is one possible cue card. Describe a person you have worked or studied with that was very helpful. You should say who he or she was, how you met him or her, what he or she did to help you, and say what you learned from the experience. Let's think for a moment what you need to do here. You must describe a person who helped you. Although this is not stated in the first line, it is stipulated in bullet point number 3. Can it be any person who helped you? No. It must be someone who you worked or studied with. You must give some explanation of who the person was, i.e. their relationship to you and a little background, and also how you met them. Importantly, you should state how they helped you. Finally, you must give some information about what you learned. It is very important that you address all these points and particularly pay attention to number 1 and 2 from my list before. If you missed either of these, you would score quite poorly. As I mentioned above, it is possible to have very similar topics. However, remember that although some of them might be the same question phrased differently, others might be a similar but distinct question. If this was the case, you would need to have a totally different answer. Here are some similar cue cards. There are more possibilities, but let's just take a moment to consider why these might be treated differently from the previous example. That is, describe a person you have worked or studied with that was very helpful. Firstly, describe a person who helped you is essentially the same, except there is no limitation to work or study. In other words, this person could be your friend or family member. Next, the middle 2 questions are not about describing a person. They are about describing the situation or the event. Here you would focus on the actual act of help rather than the person who helped you. This is very important to remember. Finally, this question is quite similar to the first, except that the person must be very helpful. In the first example, maybe your annoying brother helped you one time. However, here it must be a continually helpful person. Once you have analyzed the question, you need to think about your answer quickly. Remember that you only have 1 minute to prepare. It is a good idea to make some notes on the paper that is provided, but you shouldn't spend too much time doing it. Remember to never attempt to write a whole sentence, or else this will take up all of your time. The secret to good note-taking is only writing 1 or 2 words that will remind you of something important. This could be useful vocabulary, an important point, the structure of your speech, a difficult phrase, and other such things. Thinking about the first cue card that we looked at, describe a person you have worked or studied with that was very helpful, I would make the following notes. These notes probably mean very little to you, but that's okay. These are words that I thought of when brainstorming the question with my own personal experiences. I was thinking about a colleague of mine called Tim, whose position was head teacher at a school where I worked many years ago. His role was sort of a supervisory one, monitoring all the other teachers. Describing him as a person, I would say he was professional yet approachable, and I found him helpful because he was non-judgmental when giving advice. All of the words I wrote in my notes were examples of good vocabulary, yet they helped me to structure my speech so that I wouldn't forget what to say. Between looking at these and looking at the cue card, I would easily be able to speak for 1 to 2 minutes. It is, of course, very important that I wrote these quickly without wasting any time. This is what I would say to describe a helpful person. About 10 years ago, as a young, inexperienced teacher, I worked with a man called Tim. He was my colleague, but he was also the head teacher of this school, and so he was sort of a supervisor to the other teachers working there. Technically, Tim was our boss, but he didn't act like a traditional boss. He was professional yet approachable, so you always felt that you could talk to him about things. I first met Tim when he offered me a job at his school, and from that moment on, we got along very well. Tim was a really helpful guy, and he was always happy to share his experience with the less experienced teachers like me. He was non-judgmental, so you didn't worry about doing something wrong. If you made a mistake at work, Tim would quietly help you to make a change so that you didn't do it that way again. I remember one time I was teaching a big class and Tim had to observe my teaching methods. This was a very stressful situation for me, but Tim was really helpful. He watched me unobtrusively, and then at the end of the lesson he gave me lots of useful advice. He didn't criticize me in any way. Instead, he simply told me ways I could improve. I believe that Tim's advice helped me to become a much better teacher, and years later I am still incredibly grateful to him for mentoring me. Note how I used grammar in order to establish the time of the events that occurred in my story. As this is about something that happened in the past, I use past simple for events that occurred once or were generally true in the past. For descriptions of a person, you use this tense. I also used a conditional clause to bring some complexity in. I used the past if, would conditional construction. At the end of my speech, I bring the listener into the present effects of Tim's helpfulness by using the present simple, I believe, and I am still. Remember to keep calm in your speaking exam and treat the examiner like a normal person. It is very easy to get nervous and worried before the exam, but these nerves can ruin your band score. Try practicing with a friend before your exam, or find a speaking partner to help you. If you're looking for a speaking partner, you can find a link below to our free Facebook group where we have more than 6,000 IELTS speaking partners for you to talk with. Getting enough practice is essential not just to improve your speaking skill, but to get over those feelings of anxiety that can negatively affect your score. If you want professional help, check out my Practice Speaking Test service. It's the best way to boost your score. Again, the link is down below in the description. Please leave a comment and give this video a like if it has been helpful for you, and I'll see you again next week for another IELTS video.